Hi everyone, my name is Ayna Paisley. I'm the ambassador of Zen Art Supplies, and today we are going to be doing a little review and first impression of some watercolor palettes by Zen Art Supplies. So here are upside down. Here are the two little, or actually quite huge palettes, watercolor palettes that I'm going to be reviewing. One is called Allegro and the other one is called Sereno. Here's how the packaging looks like, and I think it's quite cute and lovely. And also we'll be doing a quick review of this little guy, which is an espresso palette that I use quite a lot. As you can see, it's already pretty dirty and messy, and I use this to you know, when I go plein airing or I paint on the go. This is quite handy, so please stay tuned. Here's some first impression and a packaging of these palettes. We have three palettes here, which is Sereno, Allegro, and Espresso. And I must confess, I already played with the Espresso a little bit. As you can see, it's already unpacked, and I actually really loved how tiny this one is, and I've been taking it to plein airs and testing it out, you know, taking it for a spin, and you can see it's quite dirty already because I've been using it quite a lot. So yeah, this one is not gonna be first impression, but more in-depth impression. But these little guys, I actually haven't opened them yet, so we're gonna look inside together and figure out the difference between the two of them. It's actually watercolor sets of 24 colors. They look very much alike, but they are very different, and we can see that in the back. It's actually two completely different palettes. I actually gave it a quite attentive look, and I don't think any of these actually cross. I think the colors are pretty much unique to every palette, which is nice, because if you have one palette, you can just buy another one and it's going to be a completely separate set of colors. So the philosophy behind the palettes is actually quite unique, and I thought it's lovely because the names of are actually corresponding to the moods of the palettes. So Sereno is actually, as you can probably guess, is more of a serene palette. So you can see a lot of blues and greens, and I thought this is like a lovely palette for some sort of marine landscapes or even just landscapes altogether. And you can actually read on the back of it that it's well, it says it's suitable for any subjects, but especially for landscapes, seascapes, and nature. And I'm gonna close up a little, make a little close up here. And we can see that it includes also two brushes, which is really nice. This one also does include the two of the same brushes. Yeah, and this one is actually Allegro, which means a more I think vivid and happy palette is as I would describe it. And it actually says that extended palette and happy and uplifting your mood colors, which is a pretty nice description because it is really uplifting. And it says suitable for any subjects, especially for floral, sunlit beaches, and portraits, which I agree, because you can see the selection of colors would actually be really nice for portraits. It has a lot of earthly tones that this palette is maybe missing. Also some vivid blues and this vivid reds that are really nice for florals. Okay, so let's go ahead and open those and see for ourselves. Putting is a bit of a challenge, but you are going to see how pretty the packaging is. I mean, I just love it. Looks like a little chest of treasures. It's so beautiful. I love the design. It's quite unique to Zen Art Supplies, and you can see the big Z here. And I know that this design is actually unique, and it was made by the creators of Zen Art Supplies. And yeah, so it's a really nice touch. And as you can see, it's inspired by Venice, sorry. And you can see the masks that are typical for Venice here. Okay, so when we open the palettes, this is what we see. And we can see that they are quite the same if you just, you know, take a look at it without getting into details. And they have the same design inside, obviously, have the same brushes, which is a flat brush, a nice addition, because sometimes you really need a flat brush to fill in like big shapes, and this is quite handy. These comes really handy, and it is a faux red sable, which is a really nice bristle. I think I prefer faux bristles to natural bristles, but You know, not all synthetic bristles are actually good for watercolor, but the faux sable bristles are perfect for watercolors. And then we have a pretty typical, you know, your water reservoir brush, which is just called water brush usually. And this one you can just fill in with water. Over here you just put a little water, and then you can sort of squeeze out water out of the brush as you go. I'm sure you've seen this around. They're quite popular now, and these are very handy if you're on the go, you know, and you just sort of need to take a palette, pop it in, and just go plein air or something. Which actually something that's also very convenient is these mixing trays. And usually you don't see that much, but I think this is pretty convenient. You can also pull this out. It comes out pretty easily if you don't like, you know, the divided palette, and you can just use this area as a palette. Or I actually often, well, I did with this one, but I often use this on the go as a water container. I would just pour water in here and use it instead of the water container, and this way I just save space. And for color mixing, I just, you know, sometimes when you're on planner you don't really mix colors that much. I just splash them on the paper and sort of mix on the paper. Well, this is just my style. You don't have to do that. But yeah, this is really convenient. Or you can actually use both. You can put this one on the side like that, and then you have two palettes, which is pretty cool. Okay, and here is actually a handy addition of a little piece of plastic. And you'd be like, why do I need an extra piece of plastic? But in fact, I think this is very handy, because once you finish working with this, and especially if you're on the go, you can just pop this baby in there and close it, and then it's going to sort of divide two areas, the working area with like a messy palette and all that, and protect your paints to be contaminated with, you know, everything that you have on the lid, so it doesn't go directly in the paints and doesn't contaminate them. Or the other way around, you know, the paints don't have to touch each other or touch this surface, so it just to remain the palette clean. And not to mention that it's actually another handy piece of palette, that a piece of plastic that you can use as a palette on the side if you want. Mixing colors here is also possible. And here is a little sponge, which is also pretty convenient, because once you use a water brush, you actually need to sort of wipe the excess of the color and of the water somewhere, and this comes in very handy. I usually have a little piece of cloth, but now I think of the sponge as actually the best solution for this, because it really absorbs water perfectly. And we're going to obviously test it out and see for ourselves. Okay, so let's concentrate on one of the palettes, and this one is Allegro, which is a happy palette. And what's inside also is this little swatch piece of paper, where you can easily just swatch all the colors and remember what they look like, which is pretty nice. And a little introductory thank you paper from the creator of Zen Art Supplies, a lovely art deck. Here is her sort of statement and a little thank you to us artists. This is a really nice touch actually, because all Zen Art Supplies come with all this 1-year warranty, which is amazing. And this one is actually my favorite piece, the one that explains, you know, all the colors, and it's just really handy to have around once you receive your palettes and just want to get to know them before you actually dive into, you know, working with them. Just take a minute and read what's in here. So let's just go ahead and without further ado swatch all of the colors in this palette, obviously. I'm going to fill this water brush with some water. Now what I'm going to do is deposit one little dot of water on all of the colors, because this helps activate the watercolor, and then we can just go ahead and swatch it, and it's going to be easier to swatch, you'll see. If you feel like your sponge is not absorbing the water so well, I'd suggest, especially if it's a new set, give it a little push so it sort of like sinks in there, and then you can use it. It's pretty handy actually. So what I actually like about Zen Art Supplies is that they never just hectically assemble any palettes. There's always a philosophy behind it, and they like to explain why the palettes look this or that way. So basically, art deck here. actually followed a pretty specific philosophy behind composing all these palettes. Ardex studied effects of color on our mood, mental well-being, and she uses art as a therapy herself. And she states that some artists actually tend to prefer warmer colors and have more outgoing and sunny personalities, and they would probably prefer the Allegro palette better than the Sereno palette that gravitates towards the cooler hues and is more calmer, as we stated earlier. This obviously can change based on, you know, the stage of your life or which mood you're in, so it's just it's not constant. That's why it's probably better to have 2 palettes rather than 1, but you can definitely just start with one that is, you know, closer to the colors that you usually use in your palette, which is also a good reason to analyze your previous work and just see which colors you actually tend to use more. I think personally I'm more of a sunny personality. I probably use more warm colors in my paintings rather than cold, but you know, it might change, so I have 2 of the palettes just for any case, you know, in my life. Okay, so here is our little swatch, and I think it's a very, very nice selection of colors. Let's see how our little sponge doing. You can actually easily pull it out, and you can see it's not even halfway full. I mean, it's actually pretty clean on the other side, which means there's plenty of room here to absorb the paints. Let's try to use some of the mixing wells. I definitely think that this paints actually passed the mixing test. These colors are lovely. I absolutely adore how they mix. They are very complex. I think this palette has endless possibilities for absolutely beautiful, you know, spectacular grays. And do you remember that to mix beautiful grays, you just have to mix opposite colors on the color wheel? And when you're done, you can just sort of clean the colors if you want, so they look a little more vibrant next time you take up your palette. Let's switch to the Sereno palette, because obviously I'm pretty excited about the colors, and I think I'm gonna use this brush to do the swatches this time, because water brush is just not my favorite to work with. And obviously the little sponge is here already waiting for us, and let's just dive in and see what kind of colors we have. I'm sorry this is stained. I just started putting the Allegro colors on the Sereno color chart, which was my mistake, so I had to quickly wipe it off, and hope that you don't notice, but it's actually pretty noticeable, so I'm sorry for that. It obviously came completely clean and beautiful and untouched, but it's just my fault. So just a little reminder, this is Sereno palette, and you can already see how different the colors are. Oh, sorry, I'll wash it a little better. And the overall mood even of the palette, I think, is pretty much different. The common trait though is the vibrancy. All the colors are very vibrant. Oh, this ultramarine blue is beautiful. Usually it's very hard to get good ultramarine blue in, you know, in student grade watercolor that is so vibrant. Payne's gray is actually a lovely gray to do any kind of mixes, you know, for really complicated grays. Oh, this Hooker's Green Deep is just so beautiful. I mean, all the colors are beautiful. I'm sorry, I just get repetitive in saying how beautiful the colors are, but they are. Okay, so here is a Sereno palette, and I think it's a good idea to sort of try to compare the two. So on top is Allegro and on the bottom is Sereno. Let me sort of separate them a little bit. So as you can see, the Serena palette is full of greens and blues. I actually think, now that I look at the swatches, that Serena palette might be my favorite. Maybe it's the greens. I actually love having greens in my palette because while mixing greens and, you know, yellows and reds, you can actually achieve really nice complicated greens and grays. But also the selection of blues is absolutely astonishing, and I think this is such a harmonized palette. Not that this one is not, I think this one is actually better for literally painting anything, like sort of a universal palette to, you know, to paint anything. If you're not particularly, you know, a landscape artist or a portrait artist or any of that, this is very universal. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some mixes. I don't know about you guys, but I actually, you know, mixing great colors is really important to me, because this is how you actually achieve a really complicated, beautiful, painterly effect in your sketches and paintings. These are really beautiful mixes and colors. I really love it. I think my favorite out of the two that I just tried is definitely Sereno, just because it sort of reflects my usual palette, I think, and which doesn't necessarily mean that Allegro is bad or, you know, something is wrong with it. Absolutely not. It's also amazing, and I would recommend both of them, you know, depending on the colors that you actually use in your work. Now let me close this one, because I wanted to just quickly show you the espresso palette. So the espresso palette is this tiny little guy. Okay, so basically this is your, you know, basic watercolor palette that has some of the cold yellows, warm yellows, has this warm red, which is more like even orangey, this cold red, some ochre, I think this was burnt umber, some vermilion. This is either manganese blue or cerulean. I would say it's cerulean. Some, I think this is mint. This is some sort of cobalt blue, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe like sky blue. I wish I kept the little paper that went with it, but I just lost it. I'm sorry, guys. Ultramarine blue, and this one I think is Prussian blue. Okay, so here's a little palette. As you can see, it's very universal and convenient. It's super small. You can just mix literally any color out of this set. You can go like, you know, for complicated grays is always great to mix ultramarine with orange. You have this beautiful sort of violet. You can mix reds with the blues. These blues I actually just love to use by themselves for usually the sky, but they actually create really beautiful greens as well, very subtle greens. Prussian blue with maybe a touch of orange is also this like nice dulled grayish color. If you just go on plein airing, this is a perfect palette for you. And obviously, you know, you can just use colors straight out of the palette, which I love doing. And like I said, I already used it quite a lot on my plein airing trips. And if you're searching for something small, you know, that you can pop it in your pocket and just sort of go, this is the palette for you. So I hope you like this video, guys. It was really, I tried to keep it quite quick and, you know, just to keep it to the first impression and packaging. But let us know if you want, you know, some little tutorials or demo on how these palettes are actually performing in actual work. And yeah, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and let's keep in touch. Bye.